All right, I'd like to call the October 21st, 2019 meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education to order. First up is to approve the minutes from October 7th and October 15th. I have a motion. Motion? Katrina?
So moved.
Second? Penny? All those in favor? All right, thanks. Next is to review and approve tonight's agenda. We have one modification to the agenda tonight, which is to add to the action items policy 7557, which is a new policy on naming of New Canaan public school facilities. Can I have a motion to add that to the agenda? Sherry, second. Julie, all those in favor? Thank you. Next, can I have a motion to approve the revised agenda? Katrina, second. Jen, all those in favor?
Is this revised? This looks different than what was on the website.
Yeah, the addition was the naming of the school facilities. I think
Well, and the one on the website said NCAF was New Canaan Athletic Fields, and it's actually New Canaan Athletic Foundation.
Well, the
We did
minutes
fix that.
of October 15th was added. That wasn't on the one on the website.
I'd have to check. I don't. I can pull up what's on the website. I have to check.
Okay.
Do you want me to do that?
Okay. Next up is comments from the public. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard? Okay, thanks. Okay, great. Come on up. Can you just state your name?
My name is Sarah Fetchett. I was here this morning listening to you all. It just came to my attention recently. Everything that's going on with the time changes. I am the mother of a kindergartner and a second grader at East. So because of that, I have very little sleep myself, and which is the reason why I don't know a lot about what's happening. But in listening to everything that everyone has been saying, I just feel that everybody needs sleep. Children need sleep of all ages. Young kids, middle-aged kids, grown kids, adults. And I think that, sadly, it seems like there are moms fighting other moms and parents fighting other parents about who should get more sleep and why they should get more sleep, when in fact it should be about everybody getting sleep and figuring out how we can make that work. And I know it's a lot more complicated than that, but with the buses and the costs, and I've seen all of the options. I read one of the options that wasn't presented today. It was a first option that was presented by the transportation company. I forget the acronym now. TAS, maybe that's what it is. And that option that was for $1.4 million seems like a lot of money up front, especially as a young family owning a house for only 3 years and having young children. But as a taxpayer, I think it's something spread across the community that wouldn't be as much of a hit, but would make a big difference. I know that all the elementary schools wouldn't be on the same time, which is another big concern, but I think that it would help the majority with the sleep issue. I'm sorry for my shaky voice, but there's obviously a lot more that needs to be said, and I'm just sad that I'm at the very end of this, but hopeful that everybody in their very knowledgeable experience as adults, humans, parents, professionals can come to a decision that would make everybody healthy and happy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If you could just try to limit to 2 minutes, that'd be great. That's okay. I didn't actually tell you beforehand, which I should have.
That was good.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Hi, I'm speaking as the parent of elementary age children. So I think an important...
Can you just state your name?
Simran Parmar. So I think an important foundation to any process like this when you're making this kind of large-scale change is transparency and public and parental involvement. And I think what is coming up now at sort of what is viewed by us as, or parents now, as sort of the 11th hour is this had always been posited, and the posture of it was a initiative and research being brought forward and at parent advocacy on the very real issue of, all kinds of teenager issues, including sleep and, patterns of homework and whatnot. And the focus was on addressing that real problem. But then at the 11th hour, you are now presenting a solution that it's sort of like a game of whack-a-mole, right? You're trying to fix the issue of teenage sleep. And then, last minute, here we go. Now the 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds are going to be getting on the bus at 7:15, at 7:20. Again, I think you have to think of it holistically, and all of the students in the district as a whole, and their sleep and other kind of patterns and issues at the same time. It wasn't really understood that way in the community, I think. It was really focused, and it still is, on the high school students. But if you're going to be making a large-scale shift that then affects the younger students, it needs to be discussed, all the research and everything for all those students at the same time. Again, or it's a game of whack-a-mole. You've shifted the high school students. That's great if all the science shows that should shift. But then you've also shifted the young students very early, not because you were thinking of science that argued that that was better for them, but just as a cause and effect from trying to fix the issue with the high school students. I think the budgetary issue, I think, is a bit illusory. I think if you look at the amount of it, you're talking about approximately $1 million between what you're looking at and the more expensive option. I think with a town this size and the budget this size and other options, I think to make this the hill we stand on and everything has to get shifted early for that $1 million a year annually, I think is short-sighted. I think there are lots of creative ways that can be addressed in the budget. Even, if you look at certain places in Massachusetts, there's fixed funding for
That's
buses.
2 minutes.
Okay, sorry, and then each family pays an amount per family above that. Again, I think to make such a huge, significant shift in scheduling, all dependent on busing instead of what's optimal for students and teachers in terms of the day should end and begin, all about the busing. I think, again, very short-sighted. This is not, in terms of the overall budget, that amount of a budgetary difference I think is minimal. There should be more creativity used to try to address it rather than just shifting this young students so early. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yep.
Hi, Marianne Fichtel. I'm the mother of a 3.5-year-old, so I'm kind of putting myself in the elementary parent mindset. And I've been doing research on the research and what's available, what I can find. So my layman's understanding of the studies and the metadata analyses and everything that I've been able to pull up is that there seems to be a pretty strong consensus on the need for teen, or let's say, post-pubescent sleep. But there is no study, even at the most sleep for teens end of the spectrum, that ever suggests that younger kids should have less sleep or should not be sleeping as much. That is not even whispered about anywhere. So that tells me something, because usually you'll have at least an outlier in data, and that one it's not even imagined. I'd also say that, most of the studies that have been done on that, there's still a lot of issue with the rigor and the data itself, because it's self-reported. But even the skeptics who are doing the metadata analysis will, pretty much across the board concede that there is, a need for teens to have more sleep. What they also say, though, is that it is an area which hasn't been studied until very recently, which is why we didn't have this data until about 10 years ago. What has been even less studied is how much is the sleep patterns and sleep needs of younger elementary age kids. So, in the sort of whack-a-mole analogy, you cannot solve the problem with the same thinking that got you into the problem in the first place. So, if you just rush into this decision where you shift the burden to a different age group, we're going to spend the next 10 years trying to undo that. So in the interest of saving us all our sanity, as well as potentially money, I say, in Norwalk, they were able to have 11 meetings of the working group on this issue in 7 months. And Yeah, and they actually ended up delaying by about a year from what they had put in their budget, the decision, and they put in their report that the delay was the silver lining because it gave them additional time to complete a thorough review of all of the research and data. So, you know, don't mistake motion for progress, is all I'm saying. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Next up is reports and recognition. First, we have our grades 3 through 8 assessment report with Dr. Carenti.
Well, it's that time of year again, where I'm back presenting on the 3 through 8 standardized test results. And thank you for having me here this evening to give you all an update. It certainly gives me great pleasure to introduce the district leadership curriculum team, many who are here this evening. I have Zoe Robinson, our K through 8 math coordinator, who will be talking a little bit later on about how they utilize the data over at the elementary schools as well as at Saks. I have Kathy Grimes, our new K through 4 reading coordinator, Karen Scalzo, our K through 5 writing coordinator, Melinda Meyer, our K through 12 science coordinator as well as department chair, Mary Hanna, our K through 8 social studies coordinator, and then we have several administrators here this evening, Dr. Fiera and Mr. Gussich from Saks, Mr. Egan from the high school, and our 3 elementary principals, Mrs. Murphy, Mrs. Wallach, and Mr. Grosso. So we have quite a crew here that are able to answer questions about the information I'm about to present. First of all, I want to acknowledge the curriculum leadership team because these people are really the content experts who stay current on best practices and design wonderful learning opportunities for our students. They lead curriculum writing, they design assessments, they design professional learning, they help with data teams, they assist with coaching staff instructionally, and we are very fortunate as a district to have these people leading. We come together monthly as a curriculum leadership council to not only review our curriculum, but to professionally grow. And there is a copy of all of our curriculum leaders within the district here. And as a matter of fact, we had a meeting this afternoon. So really, the ultimate purpose of assessment is to support and enhance student learning. It is multifaceted and should be used to drive our instruction. Assessments should be both standardized and non-standardized. And tonight I'm going to be presenting an overview of the standardized assessments results, specifically the Smarter Balanced and how they are utilized in our schools. So it's important to understand that by federal and state law, we are required to universally assess our students yearly in English language arts and mathematics in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. And then we must also assess our students in science in grades 5, 8, and once again in high school. So annual state testing is intended to describe student achievement and growth as part of a program evaluation and school and district and state accountability systems. It gives us a snapshot of our student achievement, but however, our snapshots need to be looked at with our district assessments when making our educational decisions. We know that annual state testing is not a substitute for other ways in which student learning is assessed. Student learning must be assessed in a variety of fashions throughout a school year. So we'll have our district assessments, we have portfolios, we have progress monitoring, we have teacher observations, we have universal screenings, diagnostic assessments. We use a variety of tools to assess our students and whether they're making progress on the curriculum that's been designed. So the annual state testing is the Smarter Balanced assessment. That's an assessment that students take in English language arts and mathematics in grades 3 through 8. There's also the Next Generation Science Assessment, and those are administered in grades 5, 8, and 11. And then there is the Connecticut SAT, which is administered to students in grade 11. We also have 2 alternative assessments that are given to students with cognitive disabilities. So we have a Connecticut alternative assessment that's used for our Smarter Balance that would assess students in grades 3 through 8 and 11. And then there's a Connecticut alternate science assessment that's used for grades 5, 8, and 11. We have an assessment calendar that the state of Connecticut designs, and they give us a window in which we complete these assessments. That window is quite large, and obviously it doesn't take that long to administer the assessments. Usually in New Canaan, we give the assessments for the Smarter Balanced after April break. It is usually about 2 days for the students to take the English Language Arts assessment and 2 days for them to take the mathematics assessment. The Connecticut SAT, it's scheduled for March 25th this year, and then we have 2 makeup dates, April 28th and the 29th. And then the Next Generation Science Assessment also falls within that window for grade 11, 5, and 8. And once again, we usually give that after April break to those students in those grade levels. The Next Generation Science Assessment, you may have remembered me talking about that last year. It was a field assessment last year, and it went into effect in the spring. We have yet to receive those results. They have not gone public yet. So tonight I'm not going to be presenting about the Next Generation Science Assessment. I will come back to the board with Mrs. Meyer, and we will share the results of those assessments and talk about how we'll be utilizing those in our instruction. Mr. Egan will probably join us as well. The Smarter Balanced Assessment is a computer adaptive test, and it contains a variety of item types such as multiple choice and open-ended responses. There's also a performance task that's given in the area of math. The performance task is designed to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and higher order thinking skills to explore and analyze a complex real-world situation. So when we take a look at English Language Arts, there are 4 areas of knowledge and skills that are measured. We look at the areas of reading, writing, listening, and research. So we ask students to show that they can read and understand a variety of complex, grade-appropriate informational and literary texts. They must use evidence to support their ideas in written responses at every grade level. In writing, they must produce effective writing for a range of purposes. In listening, they interpret and use information delivered orally to determine main ideas, summarize, or analyze. And in research, they take a topic and they use those findings from the topic that they've read about to support a position. And here's a very simple example from the grade 5 ELA Smarter Balanced. And when you're looking at this example, they're asking the students to go back and read the passage to determine what the vocabulary word means in context. And as you remember, when Mr. Remley and Mr. Stevenson were here and they talked a little bit about the SAT and the changes in the SAT and how students are asked to define those words in context. They're no longer just given that vocabulary word and asked to define that word. Everything goes back to that close reading and can they determine what that word means in the text. But then they also need to use evidence to support why they think that word means that definition. In mathematics, there's 4 areas of knowledge and skills measured as well. So we ask students to explain and use mathematics to solve problems. They complete math problems quickly and accurately. They understand how mathematic concepts link together. They apply their mathematical knowledge to solve real-world problems, and then they're asked to communicate their mathematical reasoning. And here's an example, once again, from grade 5 for the Smarter Balanced. And in this example, the students must apply what they know about fractions to solve the problem. So there's no guesswork. It may take time to solve this problem, but the students do have unlimited amounts of time when they take the Smarter Balance. It is an untimed assessment. And so in this case, they have to figure out what number goes in each of those boxes, not just the multiple choice, which you may have seen in the CMT, which was the prior state exam. So the scoring is very important. We look at the scoring. There's 4 achievement levels that students receive. Level 1 means that they have not met the achievement standard. Level 2 means that they're approaching the achievement standard. Level 3 means that they've met that achievement standard. And then level 4 means that they've exceeded that achievement standard. What happens is the students will receive a vertical scaled score, and that vertical scaled score is what places them into those different levels. So when we're reporting out the results to you, we look at the percentage of students who were at the 3 or the 4. Tonight, I will also be presenting a little bit more about the growth model and how we utilize those scaled scores when we're looking at the growth model. So in addition to receiving their overall achievement level, so they'll receive an achievement level for math, and they'll receive an achievement level for ELA, and then they also will receive how they're performing in each of those standards. So when we go back and we look at the reading and the listening, and then the writing and the research is combined in the area of English language arts, and so you'll get an indication, are they below that standard, are they approaching that standard, or are they above that standard? So in this case, you have a student who received a scale score of 2,590. That puts them at the level 4. And then in each of those areas, it tells us how they're doing toward each of those standards. In reading, they're above the standard. In listening, they're approaching that standard. And in writing and research, they're above that standard. What's most fascinating when you're looking at that approaching, you might say, well, they're at the level 4. That means they're exceeding it. What they do is they create a standard deviation. So on any given day, the child might be 20 points below that standard score, or they might be 20 points above that standard score. And they create a little box. And if that box kind of goes out of that level of achievement, it means that they're approaching that level of achievement. They're not in that solid level 4 range that you would expect them to be. These are the reports. This is a student report, and these are the reports that are mailed home to parents. So it gives you a summary of what the Smarter Balanced Assessment is. It talks about the results, and it will give you what the scaled score is. If they're a student who has taken the test previously, they'll receive their scale scored from the year before, and then they'll receive their current scaled score. So a parent can look to see if their child had made growth in those areas of reading and math. The scaled scores, they range from 2,200 to 2,800. So let's talk a little bit about how we look at the data, and we start with the big picture. So in English language arts, we look at the big picture of how our students performed in grades 3 through 8, and 89.6% of our students either met or exceeded the achievement level of a 3 or 4. And then we take a look, and we look at it by grade level. And we say, how did our 3rd graders, our 4th graders, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders do? We're always really cautious when we're looking at these results, because when you go diagonally, you might want to say, well, your 3rd graders were 86.2% in 2018, and now they're at 88%, so they must have grown. We caution ourselves when we look at that because it's not a matched cohort. It doesn't take into consideration students who may have moved out of the district or students who have come into the district. And that arrival can be anywhere prior to April. So if a child arrives on our doorstep at the end of March and they're brand new and they haven't been tested in the Smarter Balance, they didn't come from another district in the state of Connecticut, and they arrive, they take the standardized assessment with all of our students in April. We also like to look at how our students did by level. Once again, taking into consideration the 4 different levels. And so we like to say, how did our students perform at level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4? The stars, the asterisks, indicate that some of that data is suppressed because the number was too small, and so we want to ensure confidentiality. And so this information is really pertinent as we dive into the data and we begin to looking at it by school. So this is how it looks across the district, and then we'll also dive into the data and say, how did the third graders do at West, at South, at East? Then we like to compare ourselves to the DRG, so we get a perspective of how are we performing to other communities like ours. These are the communities that are within our DRG. And when we look at the results in English Language Arts, we did quite well. We scored the highest in the DRG, and as a matter of fact, the highest in the state. So congratulations to all those people that are sitting in the audience this evening, because it is truly all of their hard work that helps our students to perform so well. And that includes all the parents here as well, so thank you. It's always important to kind of take a look at where did our level 4, what's percentage of students performed at level 4. So we break that apart as well. So in New Canaan, we had 89.6% of our students at level 3 or 4, and then 62.2% of our students exceeding that level and scoring at the level 4 in English Language Arts. Once again, that is highest in the DRG. Then we break it apart by grade level in the DRG. So we dive into this a little bit more deeply. How do we compare to other communities like ours? And we did quite well. We performed at the top of the DRG, except for in grade 7, where we performed second in the DRG. And that was quite small of a number, but still. And then it's always important we take a look at our females and males to see if there's any patterns in that area. This year, we had 92.1% of our females and 87.1% of our males at or above the achievement level. We dive into that number a little bit more deeply. Are we seeing a pattern? Are we seeing a trend? It seems to be about where it was last year. Last year, we had 90.8 of our females at or above and 85.9 of our males at or above. So we dive into it, we look to say, is there one school, is there one grade level in particular, but we really are not seeing any patterns that would say, you know, we should be worried about this. It just happens to be something that we're just continuing to monitor and watch closely, but we're not saying, oh, the third graders over at this school, the males did poorly, or this grade level, the males did poorly. We're not seeing any pattern. It just happens to be the numbers, and we don't really consider that a significant difference. So now we're going to take a look at math. So we follow a very similar pattern when we're looking at our math data. And we start off by saying, what's the big picture? How did our students in grades 3 through 8 perform? And 88.3% of our students met or exceeded the achievement level. We take a look at the grade levels, and we do that comparison. Once again, cautioning ourselves because we don't have matched cohorts, so we know that there's certain grade levels that took a dip, and what the growth model that we're going to talk about helps us to really look closely at those numbers and identify, is there something that we should be concerned about? So you might say, when we look at grade 6 in 2018, 87.4% of the students met or exceeded the achievement level, and then in 2019, 85% of those 7th graders met or exceeded that achievement level. So the growth model helps us to dive into that and really take a look at the matched cohort, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we use that in a minute. Once again, we look at these math results by level. We look at them and how they performed at each of those grade levels and have conversations about the numbers and the students. What's most fascinating, which you don't have here on the chart, is when we look at that 8th grade performance. So once again, it's not a matched cohort, but we know when they were in 7th grade, we had 3.7% of those students at a level 1 and we had 14.4% of those students at a level 2. So we dropped down to 9.7%. In level 3, we had 26.4, and now we're at 12.5. And then when you look at that level 4, we had 64.8, and now we're up to 73.8. So that was a nice growth area for grade 8. Even though it's not that matched cohort, it is showing that many of our students in that area are making some growth. So then we take a look at the DRG. And once again, we're very proud of our accomplishments. You will see that New Canaan is #1 in the DRG, and they also are #1 in the state. So once again, congratulations to the parents and to all of our curriculum coordinators and our administrators who are here this evening for all of their hard work. We also take a look at our level 3 and our level 4 results. And we have 88.3 and then 68.8% of our students performing at that level 4. We take a look at the DRG by grade level as well. And we performed at the top of the DRG, except for grade 7, where we came 3rd in the DRG. So that appears to be a grade level that we're going to dive more deeply into that data and take a closer look at it. And then here is our males and females, and this data is very consistent to how it was last year, where our males and our females are performing comparable. So the growth model. So last year, I believe Deanna, who's not here this evening, asked me to take a look at the growth model and to come back and explain the growth model. So last year, when we presented the data, the growth model was something that was new to us, and so we spent the year really spending some time diving into it and trying to have a deep understanding of it. And we're at a place now where we really see the value of this growth model and have really worked with the administrators and teachers in talking about this growth model. So what you're going to see in the paper in front of you is how they go about creating it. So at the top, you'll still see level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. And then what the state did was they divided each of those levels in half. So based on your scaled score, you could be a low level 3 or a high level 3. So if you look at grade 7, for example, a low level 3, the scaled score would be between 2,567 and 2,600. And then the high level 3 would be the 2,601 and 2,634. The little number underneath it, that 36 and that 37, is the target of growth. So they're looking for the students to grow 36 points from grade 7 to grade 8. And then they do the same for ELA. So they take the scaled score and they divide it in half, and now you've got somewhat 8 achievement levels versus the 4 achievement levels. So we're going to take a look, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we go about with this growth model, because now what we're really doing is we're diving into individuals, and we're able to look at the individuals and have conversations not only with administrators, but also with teachers and departments. So when you look at student A, so student A in year 1 was in 7th grade, and they scored a 2,552 scaled score. In year 2, grade 8, they scored a 2,580. So their growth was 28 points. However, they were supposed to grow 40 points. So when they go through this, they either give the student a 0 if they didn't make the growth, or a 1 if they made the growth. And they call those the growth flag. And then from there, they figure out the percentage target achieved. So in this case, although the student didn't make their growth flag, they still grew 70%. And that's the average that they grew. So then you take a look at student B. And student B started the year with 2,601 in grade 8, 2,686. This student grew 85 points. They were only supposed to grow 40. So they definitely met their growth flag, but then they get 110%. They either get 110% because they've exceeded. They don't go higher than 110%. So it's either 100% if you met that growth or 110%. Student C is now at that high level 8. So when you look at that score, they were at 2,690. So in this case, they have to either grow 12 points or they have to maintain. They have to stay in that high level 8. So in this case, they grew 6 points. They were supposed to grow 20, excuse me, there's a typo there. They hit their growth flag because they maintained in that high level 8, and so therefore they got 100% of their growth. That only pertains to those high level 8s. So those kids that are at that really high level of the 4, it's telling us, did they really stay at that high level 4? And that's a question that we've asked a lot in this district. How are we really reaching that high end of students, and can we assure that we're reaching that high end? So this is very important data to us. Then when you look at student D, they too were in that high level 8, but they dropped in their points. So when they dropped in the points, their growth was 0. They don't give negative numbers. So they didn't meet their growth flag, and then they've got a 0%. So when you go to look at that next generation accountability results, the report, those that the state does, what they do is they take the average of the percent of the students and what they achieved to say that's the growth rate for that school. The state wants 100% of their students to grow. That's the ultimate target. And so ultimately, that's what we look for in New Canaan here as well. We want 100% of our students to grow. But as you can imagine, when you start to look at student A and student B and student C and student C, it tells different stories for us. And so when we dive into this data and we're looking at it by a class or a grade level, it gives us very important information. And so our coordinators spent a lot of time first helping to break apart the data and spending the time going through it with the administrators and having lengthy conversations, talking with the reading and writing and math specialists within their districts. And then from there, they went and dove in with teachers. So teachers had an opportunity to look at how their students performed last year. And in some cases, there were lots of celebrations. Somebody that grew 85 points, why did they grow 85 points? What did you do for that child to help them to grow those 85 points? The children that didn't grow, that maybe went down, what may have happened? What kind of information do we have about those students? And then they look at their current students, and it helps them to design some instruction for the upcoming year. Once again, we're always taking into consideration all of the data that we have on students. We're always triangulating that data. We're always looking back at district assessments, at midterms, at final exams, at benchmark assessments. Whatever it is helps to put that whole picture together to make sure that we're moving every child forward, whether they're at level 1, level 3, or level 4. So I did invite the 2 coordinators, and unfortunately one coordinator couldn't be here this evening, but she did send us a little video clip that we're going to share with you. And then I'm going to have Zoe talk a little bit about how they use this data with their departments, because this is that whole next layer that you asked me about last year.
Good evening. I'm so sorry that I can't be with you this evening. Dr. Carenti asked me to give you a brief overview of how we use the growth data in the ELA department at SACS, and I'm really happy to be here to do so. Dr. Carenti has highlighted the great story that our achievement data tells. Our curriculum and assessment plan is in place, and our students continue to perform at a high level on this standards-aligned assessment. As we transition our thinking to the growth model, we're able to glean patterns and trajectories of individual students and small groups of students to focus on instruction. I meet with individual teachers to share the student growth from their prior students, the ones from last year, and we look at the trajectory of their current students. We're really striving for each child, regardless of their achievement level, to grow. For example, I sit with an ELA teacher and we look at two students who have the same target of 44. One student may have made 100 points growth, which would be 110% of their target, while another only grew 22 points, 50% toward their target. Both students have met standard, but one student far exceeded their target and another fell short. This model allows us to look closely at the individual students to identify patterns, and we ask ourselves questions. What conditions and practices worked for one student, and how do we replicate the growth for all students? What social, emotional learning, environmental factors may have impacted the child? How do we create the conditions for independence and risk-taking for all of our learners? What can we do to ensure that each child grows and succeeds within our instructional model? From there, teachers then triangulate this data with our district benchmarks and assessments to create goals that are data-driven and growth-oriented. Our department goals are around independence and differentiation, and they have been established through analysis of this growth data. The next step is through professional learning. Through professional learning experiences, we provide opportunities for teachers to take risks and explore pedagogy that supports independence and differentiation for the individualized needs of all of our students. Our focus on classroom libraries and independent reading promotes authenticity and student choice or voice within our ELA curriculum. Teachers plan learning opportunities using formative assessments. They monitor student learning over time. They also come together to study student growth by analyzing student work and discussing best practices. Teachers also work closely with administrators to create professional growth plans, or the PGPs, that study the conditions and environments that meet the needs of all of our students. As you can see, this growth data is really meaningful to teachers as it helps to validate the hard work that they've put into place already, and it also guides them to ask really thoughtful, good questions about their own practice to grow professionally as well. Our teachers have been actually really excited to see the excellent growth of many of our students, and they're working really hard to make sure all of our children feel safe and respected in our classrooms. We really want all students to grow social emotionally, and we also want them to grow academically too. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Zoe's sitting there to answer them, and I'm happy to answer any in the future as well. Have a great evening. Thanks so much.
I'm going to let her know that you suggested that we only read books about math. Thank you for having us here tonight. It's always a pleasure to be able to share all the good things that we're doing here in New Canaan Public Schools. As Sarah mentioned, we worked with teachers to look at their data from multiple perspectives. Our goal is to be able to identify effective ways to help our students grow academically. We talk about classroom environment and what that looks like. Are students comfortable taking risks in math? Are we creating opportunities for students to grapple with problems? Are we modeling for students what productive struggle looks like in math? We strive for every student to be able to access the content by offering multiple ways to understand it. When looking at our data, we always start with the big picture. How is our overall performance? How did my classes perform? Were there any big surprises? Then we dive deeper. We review the growth data, and similar to language arts, we start analyzing at the student level. Who were the students who exceeded their growth target? What might have been some contributing factors to their success? Who are the students that just met their target, and how do we continue to capitalize on their growth, and what specific strategies can we put into place? We look at the students who didn't meet their growth target and start to triangulate their data. What do we know about these students? How did they perform in our class? Are there other strategies and tools that we can put into place that will help move these students forward? After analyzing student growth data, we move on to looking at their current students and how they performed. We take the same approach as mentioned earlier, and teachers are able to talk with teachers from the previous years to gain insights as well. While analyzing the growth data gives us information about where students are, We then move into action steps. Data-based decision-making allows us to hone in on specific areas of focus with our students. Our department this year is focusing on using formative assessments to plan effectively for students. In August, we started our professional learning with creating and revising unit baselines and launches. We talked about taking a proactive approach and planning for instruction that is targeted to specific needs. In our weekly department meetings, we have been focused on using those baselines to help plan for instruction. For example, the 8th grade team recently gave a baseline to students. While analyzing the data, it was clear that students needed more work with finding the area of a circle. We talked about lessons to effectively implement this and opportunities for students to dive deep into the content. On the flip side, we saw that many students had a firm understanding of simplifying expressions and using the distributive property. Therefore, not all students need to sit through a teacher's mini lesson. The team is currently working on extending those students by incorporating more rational numbers and rich, authentic tasks to help and stretch and deepen their thinking. This type of responsive teaching allows students to get what they need on a more personalized level while moving all learners forward. Our goal is to move all students. As Dr. Carenti and Sarah have mentioned, we are doing well towards our goal, but our work is not done. We are dedicated and committed to providing all students with rich and meaningful learning opportunities to help them grow. We're open to any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation. It's absolutely amazing what everybody's done, so thank you all. Any questions, comments? Katrina?
Just a huge congratulations to all of you. You know, as a parent of SACS students over the last several years, I've seen sort of some of this progress, and the enthusiasm from the teachers has been really remarkable. And I love what you said about the productive struggle in math. I can see that, and I think that is such a positive way. You know, so many children, some of my own, are afraid of math and pushing themselves. So I think that that's something really notable that's happened, and I've seen that progress. And just a question on, for the high achieving, the level 4 children, how does that correlate to what they're doing, for example, in math? You know, whether you have kids in advanced math or double compacted math, how does that correlate in terms of keeping them? Are they focused on other things, or does the test actually meet them at that level?
So the Smarter Balance assesses on the grade level that they sit in. So a 6th grade student, even if they're taking 1-year advanced math, will still be taking a 6th grade assessment. So you have to look at it from multiple perspectives. The teacher wants to make sure that although they might be implementing 7th grade content in 6th grade, that they're going back and ensuring that their 6th grade students are solid with all the 6th grade content as well.
Right. Okay.
In addition, we implement our curriculum to the highest needs of our learners. Despite whether being in a grade level class or an advanced class, we still have a range of learners within that class. So we use formative assessments in all of our classes to kind of guide the teachers of where they need to plan for their students. So all students should be receiving content and material that's based on their specific needs. So whether to the highest, to the middle, or even some prerequisite skills. Going back and focusing back on some of those prerequisite skills is also what needs to be done. We kind of expect that those students will achieve at the level 4, so our job is to continuously push their learning forward.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Other questions? Maria?
Do the parents, or do you get like granular level data on each standard that's tied to math? Like, how do you know exactly which types of questions are getting wrong? And do the parents get that too?
So it doesn't break it down by, it gives you overall claims like the problem solving, the reasoning, but it doesn't break it down. What we really look at is our own district assessments, and our curriculum is aligned with the standards. So we go back and we hold data team meetings after every unit assessment, kind of looking at what standards are the kids doing really well with, what do we need to go back, reteach, reassess, but we really implement our curriculum with fidelity, which is aligned to the standards, which helps us move student learning forward. The assessment itself doesn't break it down to that granular level, so therefore we rely on teaching our curriculum.
And are there the Smarter Balance interim assessments? Are those being used?
We do use them, but we're very careful not to over-assess our kids. We have very rich assessments within our district. We use them as we see fit to inform our instruction at times and to kind of make sure that we are covering all our bases, but we rely heavily on our district-created assessments.
Other questions? Sherry?
So just ditto, I mean, proud to be a New Canaan parent, New Canaan Public School parent with these results. I'm just curious, when you look at the year-over-year improvement, and from 2016 to 19, in ELA, it's an improvement of 7 points up to 89.6%, and in math, an improvement of 9 points up to 88.3%. Like, I'm curious what you attribute that year-over-year growth to. Is it the continuous improvement in our curriculum, or, how, and what happens when we hit 100%? I mean, and how do we continue to, challenge ourselves?
I think that was a
above and
challenge.
beyond, above and beyond this SBAC test?
So I think what we have spent a lot of time as a Curriculum Leadership Council really looking at our units of study and having deep conversations about that vertical alignment. And so when we're looking at those unit of studies, it's also looking at the assessments that go along. So the unit of study is a UBD, it's a backwards design model. So what's the unit assessment, and then how do we work to teach the students of all the standards that were within that unit. So we'll identify the standards that go into that unit, and then we'll design our essential questions and our enduring understandings, and then we'll design our acquisition. What do we want students to know? What do we want students to be able to do? And then from there, it's really kind of what are the lessons that would go within that unit of study. Certainly teachers have some flexibility within those lessons, and that's where their creativity comes into play, with the understanding that all the students are going to be assessed. So I think once we've aligned our curriculum to those Common Core standards, once we have aligned our assessments, it gives us a deep understanding of how our students are performing. I think probably what's most critical is our data teams, because it's not just you teach to it and you assess to it, it's really coming back and analyzing that data. And what does this mean for our students? And there might be students who maybe didn't meet certain standards. So how do we go about making sure that those standards are met in other units of study that we're doing in English language arts or in mathematics? So you might have to spiral backwards, or you might have to make a strategy group. That's all part of that differentiation of instruction. And it's that analysis of data and sitting down and having conversations at data teams that really help us to move forward. It also ties into all of our RTI work. So what is our response to intervention? So if students are consistently not meeting those benchmarks, what do we do for them? And do we design alternative plans that might start with the general education teacher, but then move out into tier 2 or tier 3 plans with a reading specialist or a math specialist?
Great. And just a follow-on question, in getting to 100%, I'm kidding. There's a lot of data, and especially when you add in the growth models, and how do we isolate out for that student that is not a good test taker? Like, so isolating out, the content basis versus there's a student that either is feeling the stress under the test or just not a good test taker, needs actually to focus on those test taking skills. I'm just curious how we can.
So when you're looking at that individual data, that's really what's so important, and that's the triangulation with all the other data that we know about that student. So there are students that we will look at, and there are students that you're surprised, and you say, my goodness, how come this student didn't make growth? And so then you're going back and you're looking at their district assessments, you're looking at their NWEA, you're looking at the other data to say, is this possibly, we have children that may have had allergies. It could have been 2 days of a stuffy head that they didn't stay home from school. They came to school, they fought through it, and they didn't perform as well as they should have. So it's all that other data that we're using to help make decisions about a student.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Penny?
Just the gap between the females and the males on the English language is pretty small. It's just 5%. Do you consider that statistical error or significant, or what are we doing to address it, or what do you think about that?
So we continue to go back and look at it by building, by grade level, by class. And so when the administrators are given their data, it is broken down by the grade level, and then it's broken down by class. And so they'll start to see, are there patterns of, third graders where the females and the males are outperforming one another. Every so often, you do run into a grade level that, the females did outperform the males, but then the next year, that grade level doesn't have the differences. So we're not seeing a trend. I can't say that it's the fourth graders or it's the fifth graders or it's this particular school. It just appears to be kind of spread out across the district. We're always continually looking at that information. I think a piece that plays into it is the written response, because so much of the reading is also the writing. So not only do they have to do the close reading, they have to also give a strong written response that supports what they're writing and go back and cite that evidence. And sometimes we're working a little bit more with our males to make sure that they produce that really solid writing piece that goes in.
I mean, one thing that, just on this topic, I mean, you highlighted it, it's a 5-point differential, and I think, you know, many of these other districts are 10 points plus, so we must be doing
Right.
something right.
No, I think we are, and you
Yeah.
all have made adjustments over the years and included different types of reading passages that boys tend to be a little bit more interested in than girls, or, I mean, I know there's a lot that we've done, and it's showing
Yeah.
in the results. I was just curious about
good.
what you thought as to where we were now.
Any other questions? Julie?
So Sarah mentioned something in her piece about a personal growth plan. Is that something that's a formalized thing that teachers are doing with all students, or was that more like just a term that's sort of casually used? But
So I think Zoe's supposed to answer all of Sarah's questions, but I'll
Okay.
take this one for her. That's our professional growth plan.
Oh,
So
professional,
that's our
sorry.
PGP, which is part of our teacher evaluation professional learning. So every year, every teacher within the district creates a professional growth plan, and they meet with their administrator and have a conversation about how they're going to go about meeting that professional growth plan. So they'll establish a goal, and it's oftentimes a reflection on how their students are performing year over year. So we might have teachers that would create a goal in feedback, or they might create a goal in questioning. And then they'll spend the year researching and collaborating with others, and then looking to see if they gave more descriptive feedback to their students, do their students perform better? And so that's part of that goal-setting process. So Sarah will help, and Zoe will help those teachers in the middle school look at their data and help to design some of those ideas for their professional growth plan. And then they ultimately go and sit with their administrator, who also meets with them and has conversations about where they're going to go for the upcoming school year. And together they decide what that goal will be for the year.
okay, thank you.
Other questions? I just have a couple. First, do we get a lot of questions from parents in terms of how to interpret the reports that they get, and how that might impact teaching of their particular child?
The parents oftentimes will call the administrators at the building at the elementary level, because when they're receiving the reports, they're usually a year old. Right. So in many cases, the fourth graders have moved on to SACs, and so oftentimes they're calling that elementary principal and having conversations about the data. That's not to say that they wouldn't call Steve Clapp over at SACs and have conversations about what they think for the future, but oftentimes they'll go back to that elementary principal. At the middle school level, I think it will vary between administrators and coordinators who they'll reach out to and have conversations about the data.
Okay. Have you found that parents generally understand the data, or it's kind of difficult to understand? Do you have to explain it?
No, I think the reports are easy enough to understand, and I think what they're always looking for is that scaled score, especially as they move up in the grades. So starting in fourth grade, they'll see their score for third, and then they'll see their score for fourth. And most times the conversations that are happening are when they're not seeing the growth, or if their child took a dip. And then they're usually calling and having that conversation with somebody at the school about it.
Makes sense. And then lastly, I know in the past we've communicated with the state just around development of assessments and curriculum, et cetera. I'm just wondering if we've continued to do that, and then just going forward, are there changes that we feel like should be made or need to be made to either enhance the curriculum or or extend it?
So we're constantly analyzing the curriculum. It's like living documents. And so you're always making revisions and adjustments and tweaks based on new information that we gather, research that comes out, new resources that come out to help keep that curriculum alive. I think one of the areas that we're constantly in contact with the state about, Brian and I specifically, is usually around our teacher and professional growth plans. So they'll often contact us to have conversations about how we're utilizing it and how we're helping our teachers to grow. And that's really of interest to them. We do get calls from other districts, though. So they will call to ask about what curriculum are you using, or what program might you be using, or what textbooks or resources are you using, or how are you designing your assessments. And so those are questions that we'll often field from other districts.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. This is outstanding work. I encourage everybody to, look at this when it goes online. It's, both this and the high school report, just phenomenal results. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It's great work. All right, next is our school start and end times update with Dr. Lutzy. Busy day on this topic.
It is. It has been. And boy, is that a tough act to follow.
For sure.
And while Jill isn't preparing to present to the Board of Ed, she's been helping me to arrange and organize the meeting we had this morning. I want to thank Jill for that. This morning here in the Wagner Room between 9 and 12 o'clock, we had 77 people get together into groups. We had representatives from town government, the YMCA, the Chamber of Commerce, building administrators, elementary, middle, and high school parents, elementary, middle, and high school teachers, New Canaan Daycare. Our 2 SROs were here. We had non-certified staff. We had representatives from the Park and Recreation. We even had some high school students here. So all in all, it was 77 people over two different sessions that answered the call to come together to share some feedback with the Board of Education. And while I don't have that feedback to share with you, this is the longest I've sat still all day. We will have that for you by the end of the week so that you can also add that to your consideration as we're thinking about things. The process we followed, which seemed to work quite well, was for, first of all, the people who were participating got into like groups at their tables. So the elementary parents were together, elementary teachers together, community groups were together, things like that across. And we had them using a protocol breakout groups. We had them look at 3 different scenarios. We had them look at the one from June, where the Board of Ed gave us guidance on the 3 elementaries beginning at 7:45, the high school alone in the middle at about 8:15, and then all of Saks together at the end at 9:05. And so that was the first scenario that they broke out into their groups. They sort of came up with a list from that perspective of the group. What are the pros and the cons, the strengths and the weaknesses of that scenario? Then we gave each group a minute to report out, and then went into the second round, which looked at the scenario that was discussed at the Board of Ed workshop around sort of leaving the 3 tiers the way they are, but moving it out 15 minutes for the first tier, and then 10 minutes for each of the next 2 tiers. So grades 7 through 12 would start at 7:45. South and grade 5 and 6 would start at about 8:30. Then East and West would start at about 9:15. So we did a similar process where they broke out for about 15 minutes, talked about pros and cons, came together and did a share out. Then the third scenario for the feedback was the no change option, right? So what was the feeling about that? What are the strengths and weaknesses of maintaining where we are? And then we gave the 10 minutes for that, and then we reported out from there. After those 3 scenarios were sort of discussed and considered and analyzed a bit, we did one more breakout group where they were asked to rank between 0 and 10 how they felt about each scenario, to try to reach consensus as a group, but if they couldn't reach consensus, to sort of chart where people fell. The strength of that was they weren't asked to compare one against the other. Don't say this is my first choice, second choice, third choice, but instead to have them look at each one sort of on its own merits. Fascinating discussions around that, as you might imagine. At some tables, they had 0 to 10 to choose from, and they were stuck between maybe a 3 and a 4. So I'm 3/4. And others, as the students, for instance, students are not shy about sharing their opinions. On some, they were just a solid 9. On if they weren't a 9, they were a 0. And it's sort of like the black and white across the board there. So that's, those discussions were really interesting and powerful, and we also captured that feedback that we'll be sharing with the board. There also, each of the groups came up with some questions that were, I think, really thoughtful and reflective about sort of other scenarios, suggestions. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? And so we've also captured those questions. We're going to be developing responses to those questions this week, and then we'll share them with the board and with all of the participants. So just thinking about all of that, I want to say thank you to each of the 77 people who were in the room today. I mean, it really was very rich conversation at each of the tables. And I think while I wish that I could sit here and say, you know, problem solved, here's the answer. I think what it showed is that this is really complex and messy work. It's difficult, you know. As one or two people said to me at the end, well, that was about as clear as mud now that we're here. But, you know, it shows the difficulty. And so I think that folks that were here, I really do hope, I've received a few emails telling me this, that people felt the time was well spent and that the process worked well for them. I also do hope that one of their takeaways is that, you know, the board is working very, very hard to make the best decision, and it's hard work. So I do think that folks, as they were here, listening to the other perspectives and sort of, you know, learning from each other, they certainly recognized and appreciated the task before the board as we do this. You know, my encouragement to the board and to others involved with this has been it's okay to have strong ideas, but we look for strong ideas that are loosely held, so that we can continue to learn from each other and dialogue together about these ideas. You know, the danger is always strong ideas strongly held, or weak ideas, weakly held, strongly held. That's the worst. But it's good to have strong ideas. But you know, we ask everyone to come into it and sort of hold those loosely, so that we're open to each other's perspective. And so, to a person today, the dialogue really was constructive and thoughtful. And again, I'm very, very grateful for that. Over the next few days, as I said, we'll capture the feedback and answers to the questions and share that. In the meantime, we're going to continue to research and look at everything that's going on, you know, on our end, and sharing that with the board, you know, along the way. Again, the challenge continues to be, and it again was clear this morning, that as we discussed even at the Board of Ed workshop, if you adjust time in the morning, you have to make up for it somewhere else. So it's that question of how late can that third tier go, and generally we need 45 minutes between the tiers. You know, so that's the sort of the biggest piece about it. And we've, you know, looked at costs, although I will say, again, costs were not a big driver in discussion today. Certainly there was some discussion about it on the tables, and they made the pros and cons lists, but the folks were really working hard to stay in their perspective as they were grouped there. So, you know, what are the pros and cons for this scenario? For me as an elementary parent, or for me as a high school teacher, for me as a, you know, whatever, any one of those groups that were there. So that was very, very helpful, and I hope the board finds that meaningful. And just very quickly, I want to say thanks again to Roy Walder. He was here with us this morning. He was able to answer some questions and bounce around. We were very tight on time. You just hearing what we just described, we did it twice, 2 90-minute sessions. And really, we were within plus or minus 5 minutes, I think, which worked out pretty well. And I think that the planning going into it in advance was very helpful. But Roy is a real asset for us here in the district, and so I want to thank him for being here and helping us today. I wish I had the answer, you know, the research from this morning, but we just need a little time to turn that around.
A number of board members were there this morning, and I thought it was very helpful to just hear everybody's perspective, and you know, a lot of different perspectives, but still valuable to hear all of the puts and takes from everybody's, you know, spot in town, which is, you know, varied. Any questions? Sherry?
I mean, just for the public record, can you summarize the key next steps and timing?
Sure. So for me, obviously, and for us, the key next step is to aggregate this data and get it to you, you know, as quickly as possible. We're continuing to work towards the budget workshop for continued discussion with the board, with ultimately a conversation and or action at the second meeting in December. That goal has been there so that we have an opportunity to develop whatever needs to be developed, if there is something, into the budget, which would be presented to the board the first meeting in January. So we're continuing to use that as a target.
All right, great. Thank you. Next up is the New Canaan Athletic Foundation. Dr. Lutzy. I see Mike Benevento in the back.
Great. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mike. Thanks for coming, Mike. Think back to back last winter. Leo, Carl, Mike Benevento joined the board to share information about the New Canaan Athletic Foundation and their plans for partnership between the New Canaan Athletic Foundation, the Board of Education, and the town of New Canaan. Since that time, I've been working with Mike, with Leo, with the first selectman in town as well, as we've worked through that arrangement and that agreement and what that would be. The NCAF really has 4 large goals: to leverage the town's and the Board of Ed's public investment in the athletic fields with private investment facilitated through the work of the NCAF, to build an endowment over time for the purpose of covering the private share of artificial turf replacement projects, to build an endowment of private capital for the purpose of further enhancing the town and the Board of Education's public investment in the athletic fields, to facilitate collaboration among the town, Board of Ed, and NCAF on developing a master plan for facilities, and in that work to develop a roadmap for future enhancements. It is ambitious, but I do believe the right people are behind it and putting it together. And in pursuit of these goals, they'll be developing turf replacement accounts, enhancement accounts, operating accounts, and we'll be essentially working very closely with the Fields Committee in town, which meets regularly to determine field use and field availability, and then looking at opportunities to schedule events and other things that they can then get going on the fields, whether it's Dunning or the Water Tower Turf or anywhere else, and get those proceeds in order to do this good work. Again, there's a maintenance component to it, there's an enhancement component to it, and they're really looking at opportunities to continue to develop the facilities for all of our students and for all of the town. In the next couple of days, I'm looking to schedule time to meet with the first selectman and to sign the agreement. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to say thank you to Mike, thank you to Leo, thank you to everyone involved in seeing this through. We are very excited to see this coming together on behalf of our students in the community. There's a real opportunity here to do some great things. Here we have a great facility with Dunning and turf and everything that we have now. But really NCAF helps us to put together a roadmap to continue to maintain and support and replace as needed and do that kind of work, but also look to enhance and continually improve those facilities for the entire town. So I wanted to just share that information with the board to publicly say thank you to Leo, Mike, and everyone who's been so involved with this from the start.
Definitely want to echo that. Thank you for all the great work and kicking all this off. It's a great initiative for the town and for our kids. Any questions? Sherry?
I do have a question. So this is a great effort for the whole community. Thank you so much. And I obviously get the scope of this being the outdoor fields. I'm just curious if there has been any discussion on also incorporating the indoor courts under the scope. I mean,
Sure.
the indoor courts, basketball, volleyball. I just feel like.
So I can answer that, Sheriff. So these are the fields now, but as part of the master plan, if and when that is developed over time, if that were to include pieces of inside the building, that certainly would be a conversation between the NCAF and the board. I know, having worked with them now, sort of developing this, that the NCAF leadership is committed to thinking about and working through all athletic facilities that are used, so it doesn't exclude anything. Mm-hmm. Specifically, this was written up about the fields, but there will be other opportunities down the line.
Penny?
I just want to commend all the parties for working through this. It is sort of a complicated relationship, and I think this is a fabulous initiative by the community and with the schools, and so I'm very appreciative. It took a while to get an agreement we were all comfortable with, and I think this is going to serve the future generations of students in these schools really well, and so I thank you for your patience and your commitment to it.
Other questions, comments?
I just wanted to comment also. In the past, it's been very easy for parents to get behind projects that benefit their children 2 or 3 years or 4 years down the road, but it's really a selfless act when people look forward 10 or 20 or 30 years to benefit the town and the kids that will be coming through the system. So again, I want to commemorate you for that, or congratulate you for that effort.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, next up is the statement of accounts with Dr. Keating.
All right, good evening.
Thanks, Mike.
So you have before you tonight the statement of accounts through September 30th. We are 25% through the fiscal year and 10% through the school year. Of our $91.4 million budget, we've spent 15.5 or 16.9%. Excuse me. We've encumbered 65.3 million or 71.5%, and the majority of that is the salary account. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice as I'm sitting here talking. So we've gone through all of the encumbrances for the salary account. We're currently reconciling that with the staff utilization report. So we'll finalize all those encumbrances as we go through the next month. And then we're going to be moving on to the non-salary accounts for the reforecast. There's no transfers on the report today. That'll probably take place in January for the December report, which will align with the reforecast. Pretty straightforward for this.
Okay. Any questions? Great, thank you. Okay, next are our action items. First up is our 2020, 2021 budget assumptions for first read. Any comments, Dr. Lutzy, or?
Sure. Do you want to get it first and second?
Sure. Yeah. Could I have a motion to approve as a first read the 2020, 2021 goals, budget, assumptions, and related priorities? Penny?
So moved.
Jerry? Second.
Thanks.
All right.
So you have before you, it's a mouthful. Brandon said it twice. I won't say it a third time. But really, I mean, the important piece here is we are already well underway in our budget development for next fiscal year, so 2020, 2021. And as you know, the goals, budget assumptions, and related priorities really seek to look at our district goals that, as you know, we approve in the spring each year and into the summer, and then to actualize them by considering resource needs in order to meet those goals or continue to work towards those goals. They are organized similarly, so you can line them up, so goal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but really looks to say, why do we spend the money that we spend the way that we spend it? Why do we look at the resources in those ways? We think of it, and when I talk to the administrators, we consider this sort of the true north, and make sure that as we're looking at the budget requests and we're looking at all of our expenditures, we tie them back here in our discussions with our administrators to ensure that all of it helps us to move forwards towards our strategic priorities. Some of these are similar, some of them are new, similar to the way that our goal development works. Some of these things were some are on a continuum, and other things are new. For instance, something that's added in here this year is that if there is going to be a change in the schedule, let's say at the middle school or the high school, in their master schedule of the day, then prior to doing that, we'd want to spend or invest some resources into professional development for our teachers so that they learn to deliver effective instruction in whatever structure we have. For instance, if we go to a longer period of instruction in the classroom, we don't just flip a switch and do that. We have to spend some time in professional development ensuring that that transition is smooth and works well. There's other things, for instance, in Goal 5, where we talk a little bit, we add in the cogen and some other opportunities that we continue to pursue around our facilities and managing the facilities. So it's a first read. It's a dense document. So instead of reading it all to you tonight, I thought we'd just present. You're welcome, and invite you to read between now and our next meeting. Leading with this, I think, shows that we continue to begin and think about our process at that level of our aspirational and our goals and objectives as determined and voted on in the spring each year. As you know, even as we go into the workshop, generally, we don't talk numbers. We talk about ideas and initiatives and direction, because that's really the initial part of our conversation, right? That's how we lead into it. So we wanted to get these in front of you now because we do know the budget process isn't just beginning here at the Board of Ed, but that it's also beginning townwide. And so we thought we'd start here.
Great, thank you. Any questions? I just think this is, I feel this way every year, but I think it's a great way to start the budget process. It's, what are we doing and why are we doing it? these are our priorities, and then we can figure out, how to spend what we're going to spend, rather than just starting by looking at numbers.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Next up is policy 7557, naming of New Canaan public school facilities. Can I get a motion to approve as a first read policy 7557, naming of New Canaan public school facilities? Sherry, second. Jen, any discussion? Dr. Lutzy?
Very briefly, this policy is something we don't have in place. We've had more of an informal process around approving naming of rooms or building or what have you, and knowing the work that the NCAF is doing, knowing that there can be other opportunities that come up, we wanted to be just to spell out the process for this so that people know what steps to follow if they do have an idea or for naming of a field, an apparatus, land, anything that's sort of the purview of the Board of Education. So this is from CABE. We've adapted it and adjusted it in order to, we think, best fit New Canaan. But again, it's a first read, so you're welcome to take a look, and glad to have a longer conversation at our next meeting.
Great. Any questions? I think it's good to have this policy in place. My guess is with a very generous community, that these sorts of, whether it's with NCAF or other fundraising opportunities, these sorts of things may come up from time to time.
Yeah, it's good to have a clear process that's consistent across the board.
Yep.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Okay, next, comments from the public. Anyone? Okay, thank you. Next are announcements and future business. Dr. Lutzy.
Sure. So our next meeting is November 4th, and we'll be receiving the report from Darlene around our enrollment projections and our staff utilization report. So quite a bit to talk about that night, and we'll be focusing there. And we'll have the second read both for our budget assumptions and for the policy we just discussed. And beyond that, very busy day, so no other announcements.
All right, thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Tom, second. Jen, all those in favor? Thank you.